I want to welcome you to the next Skill Adventure podcast. So here I am introducing Jan Rippingale, who is a Chief Executive Officer at Blu Banyan. What is even more interesting is that they do a bunch of work with manufacturing and a different industry, but they specialize in solar market. So they also have won Micro Vertical Partner of the Year award for this year, which I think is actually pretty incredible. I will have Jan introduce
Yes.
herself, but I do think she's pretty incredible and they do some amazing work. So, Jan, please tell us what you do as a CEO and also what Blu Banyan is about.
Thank you very much, Selvi. I'm so glad to be here. And
It's
as
my
a
pleasure.
CEO of Blu Banyan, we are absolutely focused on making game-changing systemic shifts at scale. So I was very excited to talk with you about what it takes to actually move things at scale. You absolutely need to have business savvy and being aware of how to interact well with people and what's working for them and how to grow them is a tremendous part of scaling effectively. There's a lot of confusion, I think, that you can just take a process and turn it into cogs, but really it's the people that always make the
Yeah.
scalability work. So that skill, I think, is key in being effective and moving hearts and minds to actually make the game-changing shifts that we need to see right now on our planet and for our species altogether to make it to the next level. And collectively, we have always met these challenges to date, which is why we're still here. So I believe that we're going to meet them again and exceed expectations and have a beautiful, wonderful, thriving planet this time in the next 100 years, next century. But we do have some challenges in front of us to do
Yeah.
that and need to make some shifts at scale. So Blu Banyan is my mechanism to make that happen in the world.
This is exactly how I introduce you, right? So you've got the heart and the mind part. I've interviewed a bunch of entrepreneurs. Each of them are amazing in their own style. It's probably the first time I'm hearing someone actually talk about the climate and somebody talking about the future, somebody talking about 100 years, which is long gone after us for the next generation. And a lot of time it scares me what we are leaving behind. Not a good place, it's not a great place for the next generation. And in fact, the two generations from now, I don't even know what they'd be thinking about us
How you leave a
behind.
legacy is really different nowadays than it was even 10 years ago. As I was thinking about the legacy that Blu Banyan would leave, the real legacy is only the people. It's that we're developing a system where you would identify where you can make systemic changes,
Yeah.
like a system for innovation, but also executing it and getting it out there. Because a lot of times common sense is not common practice. I can't tell you how much we can fix with retrofits on the climate problem. And retrofits are very low tech. They don't require the same solar system, silicon. None of that is required to do retrofits. And it's more impactful than the solar energy changes. So common sense is common practice and how to get people to actually execute these things. But the legacy that we're leaving is actually a culture of people whose ability to look at a problem and identify where the needle movers are and then execute to make those needles actually move. That's a legacy now. It's not the hardware that you're leaving behind. It's not the software that you're leaving behind. It is not the data that you're leaving behind. It's the people's ability to evaluate and look at problems and then solve and execute them. That is a legacy that I think will last for 100 years. But everything else, we're expecting that it's going to get replaced at a healthy clip as technology appears to me to be changing at a higher and higher rate.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned about everything else can be replaced. And I think that's true. At the end of the day, as we hear literally different technologies coming up, the belief is only getting more and more clearer that yes, it is going to change. I don't know what I use today will remain. I don't know the laptop's going to remain laptops. I have no idea, but I believe it's going to change. I just believe the change is inevitable. And I think what is probably going to be constant is us and our thinking and our approach. And if we are willing to be flexible and malleable in our approach, like you said, we probably could change the world directly or indirectly. And I loved that's what you're going after. And the fact that as a technology company, you talk about the difference that you want to make in the future and what you're up to. Because I love the fact that you're working with solar power, but I asked you, why do you want to work with solar power? Why not so many other things, other industry that's going on? And you said something very interesting. I'd love to hear that. Why does Blu Banyan work with solar power? You could be working with so many other industries.
So when I had my daughter, it was about 7 years ago, she's 7 now, it became very clear to me that I really needed to pay attention to the world that we were leaving. And in order to do that, I needed to figure out how to make some big changes, some systemic changes in the world so that what I was leaving for her would be a place that was safe and thriving and a place that I would want to live in and hopefully be better than the one that I've lived. So that's what every parent wants. And in order to do that, I had to reflect quite a bit. I was going to be an astronaut and then president when I was 9. And I never really shifted from that orientation. It is part of that. I always wanted to explore, go where no one had gone before. I was totally a Star Trek fan, grew up with Star Trek as my model for how you should be in the world. And I then wanted to bring that change and make it effective for the entire community. So I'd always been interested in exploration and then the integration into society so that everybody got the benefits of it. So I had been exposed to solar since the beginning. When I first started working with solar, they called Earth-based solar projects terrestrial solar, because when you talked about solar, you were always only talking about satellites. No one did solar on the terrestrial basis. Now, of course, that has completely shifted, and only us OGs remember that. Terrestrial solar is now the norm. I started there and had contacts in the solar space to get going. So it was where I had a foothold to start making systemic shifts. Clearly, energy needs a lot of help. And we and the country are just now starting to really develop an energy information infrastructure. The energy infrastructure that we developed with coal, gas, and oil was really physical infrastructure. We had the roads and we've got all the distribution of the gas stations and all of these things that feed that infrastructure, but they never really had information technology, right? They started building this in the 1890s to 1920s, and no one ever thought about having an information infrastructure, and that it just isn't going to work. We don't have 120 years to rebuild the energy infrastructure that we need on renewables. We really have about 30 years. So we need to do all of that infrastructure change that they did in 120 years in 30 years. And the only way that's going to happen is if we also have an information infrastructure. So by taking my interest in solar and my experience with technology and information management together, I'm working with the Department of Energy's Orange Button solution for the data standards for solar energy, which are likely to become the data standards for all energy across the country, so that we can coordinate when we've got solar power, we've got solar power, when we've got wind, when we need batteries, when we need to pull from coal and gas plants, we can just coordinate it in a way that is effective instead of the really antiquated infrastructure that is around now. And ironically, because we're developing this energy information infrastructure relatively late, the United States, it's like the anti-privilege effect. Because we had all the infrastructure earlier, we benefited from it. But over time, that means that we're also bound by it, and people are used to thinking this is the only way. So when we look at the rest of the world, they want to start with an energy information infrastructure. So what they're doing in the Middle East and Africa and India, they just want an energy information infrastructure from the beginning, because of course you need to have coordinated and redundant energy systems. It's a core function of the economy at this day and age, and will continue to be. And so I think that the rest of the world is going to leapfrog over some of the stuff that we're doing in the United States that's initiated here, but the adoption process is really long. And the rest of the world will get there faster and end up pulling the United States forward, which I think is absolutely fabulous and totally the way to go. As a globe, we're going to be able to have a common way of communicating and distributing our resources, starting with energy, because I knew energy to begin with. But we really do have enough of everything, and it really is simply a distribution problem. So solar is our first model of how we're doing that in the world. And then we're expecting to extend that to manufacturing and distribution.
Super. This is just my comment, right? I feel so hopeful when I hear you. And I also get a little bit of frustration from you of why some things are moving slow and you would want them to probably run. But yet, I feel like I get that you're excited what is about to happen. And I think every now and then I would think about climate, like in India, right now it's summer. Bangalore is not known for real heat. And I'm from Bangalore and I can't survive any other city in our country. Bangalore is ideal, but usually this time of the year it would rain and it would be so much more better. But it's been so warm, and every now and then I think, oh my goodness, this is Bangalore. What's happening to Bangalore? Can you imagine other cities and warmer cities what would go through? And the fact that it's right in front of us, and sometime it could feel like, oh, it's only getting worse. And I also am very hopeful when I hear works that are happening. Just because you don't know it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, whether it's good or bad. So I'm very hopeful when I hear you speak, Jan. But
I
too, because I know you're excited about scale. I know it is something that you've been working on and you are in the process of it. And to some extent, you never scale up and done. You're scaling. It's always in the process, which is I keep clarifying. I know some of them say, but I haven't scaled. I'm like, I know you have it. I know you're not going to. It's going to be a process, but I'd love to hear the process of scaling. And like you said, the big part of process scaling is people and process. So I want to hear from you because I know you're a massive believer of people and me too. And but every time I hear you talk about scale, you talk about people first and then you talk about process.
Scaling is a whole lot like loving, right? Love is not like an end state. It's not something that you've done and now you're done with it. It's something you do over and over again. It is a verb. It is not a noun.
It is a verb, yes.
So
and I also now understand it's a process. It's not an event.
It's going to continue because if you're done, then you've died. You actually have to build into your scale that you're going to have feedback loops and presume that you're going to have continuous improvement. So there's a capability maturity model that was put out by Carnegie Mellon that I find super useful. And they start with this very first thing. The first thing you do is you run in hero modes, and you have just smart people who know what the right thing is, so they do that, also known as burnt out CEOs. Just make stuff happen, right? And I have found that Carnegie Mellon put out a capability maturity model, and that has been super useful for me. And it starts with the first three models, or the first three steps are the ones that are most useful. The fourth and the fifth are more theoretical. But in that first step, it's just hero mode, where you get a burnt out CEO who kind of does the right thing every time that they can remember to do it, and that's their thing. And that is a perfectly good way to start. Hustle gets you far. So it's a great way to start. But then after that, you need to have defined where other people can repeat what it is that the processes are, know what's expected, and deliver the same level of quality. So it's repeatable. And then the third level is defined. And that's where you've built in feedback loops so that your processes are changing and you actually are actively looking at what in your process needs to be improved. So you've got a retro so that your processes keep improving. And if you do the defined right, people who used your process for 6 weeks ago will know that they need to come and look at the process again because someone made it better since then. And they always want to just do the work once with the right process. So that's continuous improvement actually needs to be built into the process as you're going along. And I was also thinking a little bit about hope and the world in general. One of the things that brings me hope is the fact that there's so much that we can do that is actionable. Like it's not this etheric thing that no one knows what to do and it can't happen and it's undefined. That vague uncertainty isn't actually true anymore. We actually do know what we need to do. We just need to execute it. So that's the biggest thing that takes me from despair to hope, is that I can actually see what's actionable, and I'm in integrity because what I'm doing every day is feeding that action. So I feel good about it. Totally recommend that strategy for everybody else too. Do what you can, and then you feel great about it. Even if it doesn't work out, you've done your best, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing I think the world is going through right now is we're a little bit like a teenager who had a mommy voice or a daddy voice saying, you need to pay attention to the environment. By the way, these are the people that support you. This is the ecosystem that gives you life. Like, you actually need food. You can't be too hot because then, you can't sweat and you actually die. Not only is it uncomfortable, it is actually deadly. So voices were there, but they were like parents. And the only way the world in general is realizing that we have been a teenager is the only way teenagers really learn either, which is that they experience the consequences directly. And then we're like, oh, this is way too hot. Oh, California had 5 years of absolutely crazy forest fires out of the last 7. Oh, yeah, we went from massive drought to 35 atmospheric rivers in one season. Extreme weather changes aren't good. This is a problem. An entire town burnt down in California, right? There was a spark and the town burnt down. No one lives in Paradise, California anymore. It's gone. People own property there, but it died. And if you were old and you couldn't move out, you died. So it's gotten really real. Like, the consequences are happening. And I wish teenagers could learn from words that grown-ups say, but they can't. But teenagers can learn. They just don't learn from words. They learn from consequences. So I think these consequences are kicking in. The insurance world had a major crisis this last December because no one wanted to reinsure each other like they normally do. And the rates went up dramatically, almost double, for reinsurance in a single year, because Florida got taken out by Hurricane Ian, and it was so expensive that no one wants to reinsure each other anymore. These are real consequences. We need to do things differently. It financially makes sense. You don't have to be a nagging mom or dad over here to say that we need to do this. Even the teenager wants to eat better food and make sure they can wear the cool clothes still and do all their lifestyle things, and they have to make changes to be able to do that. So the teenager part of the global psyche is getting schooled a little bit with these consequences right now. And I have every confidence that our global inner teenager can learn and is actually getting better.
But it's really that situation right now. You don't know what to do about the situation.
It is actually a substantial problem. And so if you can take a look and see what pieces seem actionable for you.
Yeah. And just as an individual, even for me, to be honest, I'm definitely hearing this conversation. I get I feel like this is the heart part of you, but I do want to get the mind part of you. Like, from a practical perspective, what are maybe top one learning with respect to scaling? Let's just talk about people, and we will talk about, I do want to ask you about marketing and sales, because for any business, I believe marketing and sales is where you get the customers coming in, and delivery where you do a great job in making sure you do a great job. You serve them and you keep them, you serve them continuously. If I have to just break that, what are your one learning under each of these? Like, one marketing sales, one thing you've learned, delivery, keeping people happy, making sure you serve your client as one part. And then from a keeping people happy perspective, internally your team, externally your client. I don't want to elaborate this question, but maybe one hack, I would even say, under marketing and sales, people from a client and team. perspective?
So my main hack is that I am looking for game-changing systemic shifts. So I'm only interested in things that are 10x better. So I'm actively looking for making a big change in people's current experience. So soft costs in the United States for solar, when the project management is 2/3 of the job, and we want to cut it in half. And by cutting it in half, the amount of solar that becomes available, like to the lower income levels, quadruples, because we're reducing the price effectively by 1/3 of the project price, but that makes it lower than the current levelized cost of energy for purchasing energy altogether. So I'm interested on a regular basis, and this feeds sales, marketing, and delivery. I'm looking for what will make a 10x difference. I don't discount the incremental changes as we go through about processes and things that we can improve. But I am getting excited about when I'm marketing and when in delivery, the way I get the smartest people to then make the clients happy and also keep themselves inspired is to find these 10x level changes. And what's funny is that they're all over. When you start looking for how you can make a substantially different way of implementing ERP, a substantially different way of managing solar soft costs, a substantially different way to do permitting in the United States altogether for all builders, like the opportunities are well over 10x. But if you exercise the discipline of looking for those 10x opportunities, you're going to intrigue and draw audience for marketing. People are going to want to, they're going to deliver what you're talking about, and then they're going to experience the benefits, and it feels good. So the one hack that I have for everything is look for the game-changing systemic shift.
I love
That's
that.
the most fun.
In fact, we used to say this. I can give an example for the US. Let's say everyone applies to study in Harvard, for an example. The number of people that apply to study in Harvard is so much more than the number of people that are applying to teach at Harvard. You can win this game compared to actually studying the game because you have thousands. Here you have very few. You could actually win this one compared. It's a different game, but it's possibly a lot easier to win the other game than studying at Harvard. It's very similar to what you're saying. Go for the big one because very few people compete at that stage.
And if you have listened to Malcolm Gladwell, and The Tipping Point has a whole piece on if you can go to a university where you're in the top 5% versus going to Harvard where you're going to be in the middle, you will actually get more attention from your professors. You will get a much better education if you're going to a state university where you're in the top 1 to 5% than you will if you go to Harvard and you're just one of the people in the middle. So putting yourself out there on the extremes.
Jan, in my first pre-primary school, I think I was on the top few people, and then I moved school, and suddenly you weren't recognized. I was thrown off with the experience of, wait, what? No one knows me? What? And I think that was hard for me, but that was good for me. Because I would have been very comfortable with my few people, and I would have come out and got hurt even more if I'd finished all of my education there. So I love that you mentioned that point. I feel like a lot of time I ask them about business, and in your case, it's been business, but it's also been much larger picture because I do observe thinking about now, you're also thinking about the larger future and what we get to do. And I can see it's 10 years for you or 20 years for you. I can see that. This is not me assessing you. This is just literally my observation of how you're thinking. But I have a very practical, problematical question. It's everyone's problem today. How do you hire people? Where do you find talent? Because the question about somebody joining, finding a way to keep them happy, I think a lot of businesses are doing terrible job, but a few businesses are doing wonderful job. But I have on a regular basis heard struggles in how can I hire? Where can I hire from? How do I attract talent as a massive issue? Because I know it is a key, like straight away. People make scale happen. How are you solving that problem?
So I have some hacks. I'm sure you're not surprised. So the number one best way to hire good people is to hire friends of the people you already like. So referrals is the number one hack, and it's not especially scalable sounding other than hiring somebody who likes to be where you're at and they have friends. Then it's the cheapest way to find them, and there's the most likely to be successful. Our number one predictor of success is that if somebody at Blu Banyan already likes you, you're likely to be successful. So that is actually our number one hack. There is a point in time when you're scaling when that doesn't work. But the networking pieces that you can do with LinkedIn and some of these other things are really where we get the highest benefits from that. The other thing is that when you're interviewing, we really ask situational behavioral questions. Tell me about a time when you were frustrated about something in the world that wasn't working well. And what did you do about it? What was your answer? So we're looking for people who are generating answers, people who are taking action. That can happen in a grocery store. It can happen at a medical office. The US medical system is intensely inefficient. So it can happen wherever in your life, right? There's nobody who isn't going to come up against friction. And what did you see was the answer? And what would you do about it? Or what did you do about it? It's even better. And for us, that's how we find people who are interested in making game-changing systemic shifts, because they have to see them and they have to execute them. So we ask, where have you already done this? And then it's not so hard to fit in around here.
In fact, at interviews, most of them don't even look at their resume because I don't really think that's what's going to change the game here. Obviously, conversation, we ask them these questions, and I keep telling, I'm only looking at how you're thinking. Obviously, a lot of our guys are also freshers because I sometimes have noticed to hire a fresher and train them is so much more better than having someone literally coming with baggages, and it takes so much of cleaning before starting. You know what I mean? But tell me something, because I've been in a situation where you're talking about these questions. Do you also understand the second you start asking these questions, your funnel is this? You meet hundreds of people, and then what is left over is one or two that join the probation. Is that what happens to you guys? How many people you have to fill on the top?
So there's a couple pieces here. We're an industry leader. So at this point in time, we've really got a reputation and people are actively seeking out to work here at Blu Banyan. So we're in a different place this year than we were a little in 2022, but previously. So it does actually get you to this side eventually.
Nice.
If we have somebody who doesn't understand this, we're not going to like them anyway. So it is better to take the time and only work with, because spending the time to get somebody who isn't really going to work out is really hard.
Yeah.
So at one point in time, we had a third of the people didn't make it through their first 90 days. And that was our trigger to really improve our interviewing skills.
Got it.
Because we wanted the relief. We wanted a body in the seat now. And every single time it was way more expensive to get the wrong body in the seat than it was to just wait and get the right body. So it absolutely reduced our funnel to only a few people, but boy, they're keepers. Oh, it made all the difference. So I recommend waiting. And if you can find people who already like what's important to you, one of the key things that I needed to do was this values exercise. What is it that you are doing, and articulating what that is took a while. It took 18 months to really tune it up and figure it out. And one of the most useful exercises was this thing called anti-values. I had a list of things that I liked, apple pie and cherry gum and everything from the roses and flowers and happiness. And none of that is differentiating. But then I had a list of things that drove me crazy. I don't want to babysit you. I don't want to sit and tell you every single thing you need to do. I don't want to take a long time to do something that could have been done in 5 minutes. Like, I need speed. So I wrote down my anti-values, things that made me crazy.
Can I tell you what was my number one? Drama. No drama. It is literally my number one, two, three.
Yes, absolutely. And so what is drama, right? It's somebody whose biggest problem is somebody else, is themselves or somebody else, right? Their
Yeah.
own world. So for me, that's the anti-value. You don't want drama. But the only
Yeah.
way to not have drama is to focus on something else, that you're solving such a bigger problem, so much
Problem.
more
So you're
interesting,
not in the attention. Absolutely. I love
that
it.
it's not about you. Very little drama
This is
of
so
that
good.
kind at Blu Banyan.
Yeah.
The other thing that we do is that when things get hot, we get funny.
Ah.
So there's a couple things. One is that when things are hot and you feel tension, all of the brain goes into the fight or flight and you're super not creative. It doesn't work. And so adding pressure to that burns people out
Yeah.
and is utterly counterproductive. You're like literally restricting their ability to be creative. And we use Giphies in our Slack channel all the time.
Yeah.
And I spend 15 minutes, 20 minutes a day searching for the right Giphy in the right.
Really?
Yeah, it's like a Giphy searching is one of my skills as a CEO because I want to hit the right feeling so that they feel like you're not setting me up to take a
Yeah.
fall, for instance, or you're not setting me up
But
to
I'm
do this
for
thing.
you.
We're here together solving this problem together. So Giphies are like
That's a
a
great
key
hack.
glue.
In fact, in our team, we started sending voice notes instead of writing. We never write. If we had to give a feedback, if we had to give a suggestion, we're always, hey, there's a lot of expression, there's a lot of context, there's just to make sure we're landing in a right way. Jan, this is so good. This, especially on the hiring, because I think it's a massive problem because there are more people without jobs and there are more jobs without people. And I think what I also heard you clearly say is that the funnel is small. And I do think there's a real warning to people, individuals who are looking for a job, and people who are willing to shift and willing to put in their skin, like you said, willing to take action, willing to see what is going on, put in the work in thinking. I think really are going to change the game and are happy and welcome and arms are open. I really hear you. There's a lot that is happening in making sure we take care of people, but it's also very clear you've got to pull up. Only then this is going to work. I love the wide and narrow that we were able to connect with. Obviously, you're in a much larger scale, but I feel like there's a lot of cultural fit. Where is the bigger problem? For us to create anything big, we need to go after something much bigger so you're not in the picture. And I love every time you talk about that, there's a lot of bigger problem, but I also love the fact you think about execution, which is today and tomorrow. I have absolutely enjoyed having this conversation with you.
It
It's
has
been a
been so much
pleasure.
fun.
And thank you so much for joining.
My pleasure. This was so much fun, Selvi.